Welcome to Conversations with Cal, where real stories spark real impact. I'm Cornell Calhoun III, and right here in the heart of Cleveland, we sit down with leaders, creatives, and visionaries who are shaping our communities and inspiring change. From personal journeys to powerful ideas, these conversations celebrate resilience, purpose, and the voices that move our city forward. This is dialogue that uplifts, connects, and challenges us to grow. Welcome to Conversations with Cal. Greetings, Cleveland, and welcome to Conversations with Cal, the show that initiates engaging conversation. I'm your host, Cornell Calhoun III, and I am thrilled to have as my guest, attorney turned novelist, Miss Melody Chu. Melody stops by the TV20 studios to talk about her debut novel, Mathey Girls, a powerful story about grief, endurance, and the unbreakable bonds that carry us home. Melody, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cal. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Let's get right into it. So, I think this is so incredible. Like, you walked away from an international legal career and a law degree at Harvard to come back to Cleveland. Was it more terrifying or was it more freeing for you?
I think coming home for me was definitely more freeing, and it really happened because I had my daughter. My first daughter was born when I was in Beijing with my husband, and that my priorities totally changed. So I had always wanted to be in Asia when I was in college and I was in law school, and that's why I ended up in Hong Kong and then in Beijing, and I loved it there, and I still love Asia. But it was a really tough place to raise a family, and I knew that, my daughter was born, and by the time my husband graduated from med school there, she was 2. And he could have stayed in China and practiced, and I could have stayed with my career in Asia as well. But for my daughter's sake, I really wanted to go to a place that would give her like better air quality, better food quality, and just a more kind of carefree upbringing, like the kind I had here in Cleveland. And so I was lucky enough that when I came back to Cleveland, I was able to work remotely for my firm's New York office. And so I did that for a number of years before I stopped and started writing.
Because I know you had planned the career in China, right? Yeah. So what did it mean to be like spiritually and emotionally called back home to Cleveland?
It was a huge circle, and I think one of the experiences I had growing up here, which I think is probably common to many Chinese Americans who grew up here, is that I grew up not very connected to Chinese culture. And then when I went to college and started studying Chinese, that was when I kind of opened up this world that I had not had as much exposure to as maybe if I had grown up in a place with a larger or more centralized Chinese community. And so I never thought that I would come back here. I mean, I loved studying Chinese and Chinese culture and all of that. And I really, coming back to Cleveland to raise a family, I wouldn't have said, oh, I would never want to do that. I just didn't think I would want to do that,
Right.
And so, but again, once I had my daughter, and it was actually a very easy choice for us. We knew we wanted to go back to the States. And for me, Cleveland has always been home. So the first year we came back, we actually lived with my dad in my dad's house and got ourselves settled in. And then I was super happy that my husband got his residency at UH. And so we stayed here. I've always, even in Hong Kong and in China, I've always been the biggest Cleveland advocate. Like, I always tell people how great it is.
Did you wear your Cleveland paraphernalia?
I maybe not so much paraphernalia, but I wore it in my heart.
Okay.
And I would definitely when I would meet fellow Midwesterners when I was in Asia, like expats and stuff, I would always get really excited because, even though I thought, oh, I'm going to spend my life in Asia and my career in Asia, I guess there was always Cleveland with me. So.
You nearly died with your third child.
Yeah.
In fact, doctors called it a miracle. Talk a little bit about that, because that's part of the backdrop of the fabulous novel that you wrote, Mathey Girls.
Sure. My third son, Ben, I had him at UH Main Hospital. And at that time, I was still working as a lawyer. And it was a freak medical incident. So I had what was called an amniotic embolism. And when that happens, and they don't know why it happens, the mother has a severe immune response to getting amniotic fluid in her bloodstream. And, to this day, they can't predict it, they can't prevent it. And in most cases, it's fatal. So in my case, I had it, and I was luckily at main campus because ultimately I had over 40 units of blood transfused to me, which is the equivalent of like 5 grown adults worth of blood that were transfused into me as I kept bleeding out. And so, yes, the doctors were kind of, when I woke up, when they brought me back, they kind of just kept telling me how lucky I was and how it was such a miracle and how if I had any other thing wrong with me, like if I had high blood pressure or if I had diabetes or anything, I wouldn't have made it. Like basically, I just kind of, that one hair made the difference where I stayed versus I didn't make it. So of course, that was like profoundly moving to me as a person. It took me a very long time to kind of wrap my head around what that meant. But it was that experience that really reawoke my desire to write creatively. So when I was a kid and in high school, I had really been interested in creative writing. I wrote short stories and poems. I even wrote a screenplay when I was in high school.
Hey, now you're talking my language.
Yeah, I don't think it was any good, but like I did. I tried. But then when I was in college and when I was working as a lawyer, that was all kind of put aside because my sights were somewhere else. But when I was in the hospital recovering, like even in those first few days, I felt this really strong urge to write what I felt, and not just what I felt, but kind of write about all of these other experiences I had had since the last time I had been writing. And in my head, I thought of it as kind of like, I want to write for the sake of my daughters, because at that point I had my 2 daughters and my son who was in the NICU. And I felt like it was too close of a call that, if one other thing had changed, I wouldn't be here and my daughters wouldn't know, right? Because they were still so young. They were 6 and 2. They wouldn't know who I am and what I've experienced. And I felt that so strongly, like I need to get something down for them. It took me a couple years. I kept working for 3 years and I recovered. And then I decided, I think I need to step away from this and do what I really want to do. And so I tried the novel writing thing. And it took me one novel, which was nothing about the childbirth experience and nothing about my experience with almost dying. My second novel, Mathey Girls, that's when I think I got to a place where I could really dive into that experience and what it meant, and what the potential consequences of it could have been if I hadn't made it.
You said recovery was really hard. Was writing sort of like the medicine to help you through that?
I think recovery had quite a few aspects. So there was the physical recovery. It took me, I think, about 2 months before I was actually, like, my blood levels were testing normally again. Because what happens when you lose that much blood is your organs actually start to shut down. So slowly my organs kind of rebuilt themselves. And then we had Ben, and it wasn't until he was about a year old that it was confirmed he was probably going to be fine. So it was, in that the physical aspect took a long time. The emotional aspect also, of course, took a long time. I saw like a PTSD therapist, and yes, writing was it was like the language I knew, the best way to express myself, for sure. There were a lot of things I couldn't talk about, or I didn't know how to talk about them, these feelings that I had. And even with my writing, I felt like closer to the time of my experience, I wasn't comfortable writing that close to what had happened. It took a while, but writing as a means of just getting emotion out, even if I wasn't writing about that particular thing, was something I turned to.
So the first novel, what was that about?
So it was about a woman who is a lawyer who moves back to Cleveland after her father has a stroke, and kind of revisits her childhood connections and stuff like that. And
so then what prompted you to delve into the situation with the next novel? Did you find out that, you just wanted to explore something new, or it just came to you that this is what you wanted to write about? In Mathey Girls? It
definitely came about over the process of writing my first novel and finishing it. I felt like that novel was very much a singular story about a singular person. And I felt like what I needed to do next was a novel about friendship. And so that was the kind of idea I started with. The idea was I want to write an ode to friendship, because I have been blessed with these really close friendship groups, like when I was in college, when I was in law school, and now. And I felt like I didn't do that aspect of my life justice at all with the first novel, and the second novel, that was the seed. And then, when I think about my friendships, one thing that really kind of solidified that idea of how important the friendships are in my life was when I almost died, and I had two separate groups of friends who came to Cleveland to kind of support me and bring me through that time. And so I wanted to pay homage to that.
When you think about writing, and I want to say, I read Mathey Girls. I think it's a fabulous piece of work. I really do. I was really moved by it. In fact, I hated to stop writing because normally reading. Normally I like to read from cover to cover, but obviously you can't do that with 300 pages. So my question is, once you got the basis of Mathey Girls down, how long did it take before you were able to complete it? And was it a difficult process, or because a lot of the experiences in the book you kind of, lived through?
Yeah.
Would you say?
Yeah, so I think it was a labor of love. I mean, I love the process of writing and editing and revising novels. So I'm working on my third novel now, and for each of my novels, the first draft took a couple months. And then there's like a couple year period of revising it over and over again. But one thing with Mathey Girls, which was different from my first novel, is that it came together to me much more organically. Like from the very first draft of Mathey Girls, I really had some kind of faith in it.
Okay.
I knew that overall the story arc was where I wanted it to be. And I did, of course, make a ton of changes from the first draft to what, you read. But I had a lot of belief in it along the way, which is kind of why I ended up self-publishing it, because at some point I realized I'm very proud of this book and I want it to get out there. Now,
is Esther, the main character, Esther, is that the strength that she has? Is that you? Would you say?
Yeah, I actually don't personally identify with Esther that much.
Okay.
I think when I decided I wanted to write a book about friendship, another idea I really wanted to toy with was this idea of imposter syndrome. And that is not necessarily because I felt like I don't really, with my career and the work that I did, I never really felt that kind of imposter syndrome. I think I was really good at what I did. And honestly, it was very stressful and difficult, but it wasn't like I felt less than. But I think, unfortunately, I know more than a couple women, I think, who have this feeling that I have this degree, I have all these expectations, and I don't have this fancy career, so I'm not living up to that. And that has always hurt me, because these are dear friends, and I know, they're amazing people, and, having a career does not make you a successful person.
Right.
And so I think I wanted to play with that kind of character, actually, a character who doesn't recognize her own worth. And hopefully through the novel can start to see what she's capable of and is willing to open herself up to risky situations because of what she's learned and how she's grown.
Grief can isolate people.
Yeah.
But in Mathey Girls, the friendship is the lifeline. Was that important to you to make sure that the reader got that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think so. My own personal experience when I was recovering from having my son Ben, it was about a month out, and I was still very much recovering. I wasn't back to my full self. I was mostly at home, and all of a sudden, my group of law school friends just showed up on my doorstep, and they had organized this complete surprise reunion trip, and we had not all been together for about 10 years. So it was, completely unexpected. And they all had kids, and they all basically got their husbands to watch their young kids. And, they all got on a plane and flew out, and they came to visit me and spent a couple of days with me in Cleveland. And I think it was amazing for me in terms of emotional support and recovery, but it was also amazing for them as well. And as a group, I think that experience of bonding over something so terrible that had happened really made our group so much stronger. And now, since then, we try to see each other very regularly. So this past spring break, I actually went to see one of those law school friends, and my family stayed with her family. So I have so much gratitude to my friends, and absolutely that level of love for my friends. Hopefully, you can feel it when you're reading Mathey Girls throughout.
Well, you can. What do you think, or why do you think young adulthood friendships, what makes them so enduring? Like your friends, your real life friends, and then the friends in the novel.
I think there is something very, very special about first about that period of when you're in college. At that point, it's the first time you are really figuring out who you are as an adult and figuring out what you like, what you're capable of, what you don't like, and you actually get to make choices. So, up until you get to college, your life is very much whatever your parents have put you in and what, the home that you've grown up in. And college is when people can really branch out on their own if they want. And I think, at that time, especially for a woman, I think because women go through so many changes throughout their lives, whether they have kids or not, whether they get married or not, whether they have a high stress career or they don't. But the fact that my friends that I met when I was 20 have been with me since I was 20, and they've seen all the different changes that my life has gone through, and I've seen all of their changes. Like in some ways, they know me better than, say, my husband knows me, right? Because he met me when I was almost 30. So he missed that more formative period of who I was. They know me better than, in some ways, my family, because my family knew me the most when I was a kid before I became an adult. So I think there's something very, very special about those friendships that form right when you are starting to become like a person and you're all starting to become people. And then as your lives branch out in all these different ways, you still maintain that connection.
Cleveland's very important to you in the novel.
Yeah.
Why is that? Would you say?
So in the novel, Esther, the main character, goes back to Cleveland when she has this kind of crisis point, and she goes back to her family and spends some time with her parents to reconnect. And I think for Esther, it's extremely important because she, the novel takes place kind of at the tail end of the pandemic. So she's been very isolated and lonely. And she has these friends, but their friends are not in the same place. And so they're communicating over, WhatsApp chats and Zoom calls. So when she goes to Cleveland, she can be in her home with her family, in person, cooking together, watching TV together. And I think why Cleveland? I think to me, Cleveland is home. And I think I definitely wrote Esther as a Midwestern ABC, like American-born Chinese. So she grew up maybe not necessarily super Chinese, which is why there are some of the conflicts she has with Lazarus's family because they're from Taiwan. And so to me, it was like a very easy choice that would be the place that would be home. And actually, my next novel basically takes place here in Cleveland. I can't imagine at this point writing about something that's completely removed from it because it informs so much of like my own identity.
You survived like the unimaginable, and came out with flying colors. How did that kind of like redefine your life, or did it?
So I think my life has been pretty exciting. I have to say, I've gotten to do a lot of great things. I've got to meet a lot of great people, and the experience with my son, it was an inflection point. So I think about it as maybe someday I would have become a writer, someday. Mm-hmm. Maybe someday I would have, maybe this was my destiny or something. But for me, I can see a very clear cause and effect between this happening and then me making the choices I made in the years following, because I really had to confront my priorities, And I think that the fact that, I had these young children and I was so close to death, struck me so deeply. It was kind of like, I need to take advantage of this time that I have. And I'm really happy that it's gotten to where I am.
What conversations do you hope that people will have after they've completed Mathey Girls?
I would love it if people read Mathey Girls and they feel like they saw something of themselves reflected in it, and that they can maybe reach out to an old friend, maybe even recommend the book to the friend, and they can talk about it, because, to me, the friendship is the most important part of Mathey Girls. And I know there are some things that people might not necessarily relate to because, the main character is Chinese American. She went to Princeton. I mean, it's not necessarily a universal experience by any means, but I do think the friendship, the anchoring of friendship is is a universal thing. And I've actually found a lot of readers really relate to the imposter syndrome side of it. I don't know if you did. You might, maybe you didn't.
I related mostly to the, I'm a very emotional person, very emotional writer. I related to Hannah. I related to the friendships, the different personalities,
Yeah.
but all of them coming together when they needed to support Esther. So that's what I really identified with. And I have to tell you, it was the kind of book that I told you off camera that I hated when I had to stop to read it. I mean, I'm just being honest. I just think it's a fabulous book. And that's why I was saying, what do you want people to take from it?
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, it means a lot to me that people who aren't like me, who don't look like me and haven't had my experience can still find meaning in it. So it meant a lot to me when you said that you enjoyed it and you related to it.
What's next for you besides this? This will be the fourth novel, right?
Third novel. Yeah. So I'm in the thick of this and I don't know what's next for it. So I guess the question that I am grappling with that I can see over the next couple months is whether I self-publish this next book or if I try to get it traditionally published. They're two very, very different paths.
Right,
and
yeah.
One will take a very long time. One could be very quick if I wanted to make it happen. And so I'm not sure. I'm still working on the book. I think it's a really funny, lighthearted book. So it's very different from Mathey Girls, but it makes me laugh every time I read it, which I think is a good sign. And I don't know, I'm just excited. I'm trying not to make too many concrete kind of assumptions about how the book will do or how it's going to come out, but I'm looking forward to getting it there. What
are some of the responses that you've gotten from Mathey Girls? Some, especially people who don't know you.
Yeah, so I think overall, people have enjoyed it and they have found it. A lot more people than I would have thought have related to it, actually. So not just thinking, oh, it's an interesting story or this is an interesting thing, but actually felt like, oh, I feel seen by this. You know, I can really get this. And that's been super gratifying. And I think another thing that I found is that people have very, very different views on the characters.
Right.
So some people think Esther they totally relate to it. And people have told me, you know, I've always battled imposter syndrome and, you know, I totally see where she's coming from. And then some people see Esther and they say, I can't relate to her at all. Like why isn't she doing this? I was so angry when she did this. And I think that's fascinating, right? Because to me, I write the character and that's all I can do, right? I can't. How each reader then takes it in is like not in my control at all. Right. But I take it as a sign that the character is true, that it causes these different reactions in different people, because if everybody had the same reaction, then that probably means that I wrote a very one-dimensional, you know, like this is a bad guy, this is a good guy. So that's been interesting to learn.
So is there any like one statement or one response that stands out that you found when someone talked about the book? Something that you just, you know, you said, wow, you know, or...
So I've had maybe 2 people tell me that this is the first time they read a book where they felt like they were represented. And to me, that is a huge honor and is not something that I ever would have expected. I read a lot of Asian American fiction, and so I know that it's not super out there, but I know it's out there. But I think the perspective of a Midwestern Asian American growing up is very different from the perspective of someone who grew up in San Francisco or in New York City. And I think many of the books that people read by Chinese American writers are by people who are from big cities with big Chinese populations. And so that the fact that 2 people have told me that this is the first time they see themselves in a book it really shocked me, actually.
How important was it for you to include Cleveland in there?
I mean, I think it's super important. And I think I actually did an event with Cleveland Public Library last year about growing up Chinese in Cleveland, because I honestly think that it is a very, very unique experience. Cleveland is a big city and we have a lot of Chinese people. There is a big Chinese population in a sense, but it's very spread out. So it's all, you know, geographically, it's not all located in one place. And then people, due to the history of kind of China and Asia, their backgrounds are so different from, say, somebody whose parents came from Taiwan versus somebody who came from China versus somebody who came from Malaysia or Singapore. I mean, very, very different. And so I think that experience of growing up here is very unique, and I can't, I can't separate that from myself, and I don't really want to separate it from myself or my writing.
Well spoken, well spoken. Now, finally, where can people buy the book Mathey Girls?
Thanks for asking. They can buy it online. So wherever you can buy books, I'm excited to say that it's available in every form. So
That's
print,
great.
ebook, audiobook, and all of the libraries in Northeast Ohio, you should be able to get it in all forms.
And
hopefully.
of course, Amazon.
And of course, Amazon, yeah. And
Okay.
then they're like Loganberry Books and Shaker, they also have copies. I think they have some signed copies there if you want them.
Okay,
So.
that's incredible. Melody, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having. I love talking with you.
I love talking with you. You got a good best friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Melody Chu's Mathey Girls reminds us that even in life's most difficult moments, the bonds we build with others can help us grow, endure, and find our way forward. I'm Cornell Calhoun III for TV 20 We Are Cleveland and Conversations with Cal. And remember, if you don't like what's being said, change the conversation.